building a complex system, it doesn't take a genius to do that. It takes a genius to take something that's very complex and actually turn it into something simple. That's a lot harder.
Welcome to the Waste No Day podcast, a podcast specifically for and about the home services industry as it relates to plumbing, heating, air conditioning, and electrical. More than a podcast, Waste No Day is a credo, a determination, a mindset. It is a never-ending discipline. It is a refuse to lose pursuit. It is a wake-up call every morning to waste no day. Now here's your hosts, Brian Burton and Nate Minnick.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Waste No Day podcast. Your hosts, Nate and Brian, hanging out with you again and looking forward to a very special guest that we have on the show. Dr. Benjamin Hardy is joining us today, and we are so excited to have him on. This guy is amazing. He has authored and co-authored so many books, including his most recent one, The Science of Scaling, and we are so honored to have him on the show, and it's going to be a great, fantastic conversation talking about scaling your business. Whether you're a technician or an owner or somebody who is an entrepreneur looking to become or start a business, I should say, this episode's for you. We're going to get nitty gritty and we're going to have a great organic conversation with Dr. Hardy today. Before we get to our honored guest, we are going to spend a little bit of time with an introduction ourselves, and we're going to start it off with a quote from Brian.
Success isn't that difficult. It merely involves taking 20 steps in a singular direction. Most people take one step in 20 directions. Dr. Ben Hardy.
Yeah. So deep, so deep. And you can tell even by that quote that like this guy has thought this stuff through. This isn't just, theory anymore. In fact, he has applied the very elements of the book and so much more into a business that he started called scaling.com. And it is doing exactly what you would think it should be doing with that name.
Yeah, 100%. It reminds me of Jim Abrams' quote, who's one of the founders of 1 Hour, Ben Franklin, Mr. Sparky, the Clockworks team. People would talk about putting branches out and going into other neighborhoods. And his answer was, go deep before you go wide.
Yeah.
Right. Own one thing before you start branching off into other things. Take 20 steps in one direction before you start taking one step in 20 directions. It's a great quote, man. I'd never caught that quote until today. So yeah, I might get something made up with that.
And he is he's such a great author. And Dr. Hardy is, not only is he easy to listen to on an audiobook, he's easy to conversate with as well. And we're looking forward to part of that today. Before we get into it, though, we have an exciting announcement to share with you. If you enjoy the conversation with Dr. Hardy that we're about to have today, or you've read his book or books, or you're just generally interested in the idea of really rapidly growing your business, he is going to be live and in person at an event called the Scale Summit. The Scale Summit 2025. It's on November 5th of 2025 in Scottsdale, Arizona. And it features a 4-hour hands-on workshop with Dr. Ben Hardy himself, also followed up by the friend of the show, Jonathan Wisman, the sales boss, focused on scaling your business. If you're interested in this, you can sign up and learn more about the events at Elliott, that's with 2 L's, Elliott247.com/scale summit. That's Elliott247.com/scale summit. Make sure that you check that out. The website has lots of great information, not only about Dr. Benjamin Hardy, but also about the event, and you can get your tickets and reserve your seat there. He's not the only one speaking. There's multiple other speakers of some renown, and I'm sure it's going to be a fantastic event because Dr. Hardy is going to be there, and you're going to love it. So now that we've kind of gotten through some of the particulars there, it's time to talk about what scaling really means. And the ideas in the book, I read the book. It was a great and simple read. I read the book, and a lot of what the concepts brought out of it for me were around the ideas of like letting go of the things that have been as an acceptance of like, I can't just keep doing these things if I'm looking to move on and move on faster, farther ahead. Right. And so some of the things that hold people back one of the profound things that hold people back is this concept of like the elephant. And in the book, he talks about how, when coders program their lines of code and everything, they'll initially do a rundown on what they're trying to accomplish. And that kind of becomes like this starting point, but then it needs to evolve from there. And the problem is that if you aren't willing to let go, like the original, you never can evolve into the new. And there's kind of this story behind that original code is known as the elephant. And so you have to like let go of this elephant. And so I was listening to the book, I was kind of struck by how, some of these impactful statements and how they were applying into my life, into business and things like that. And I was even looking at myself in the mirror saying like, I'm the elephant in many cases, like I'm holding things back by the way that I want to do it, or that we've always done it, or that I feel most comfortable doing. And so it was great concepts like that I heard in the book that really made it profound for me. And I was super excited to be able to talk to Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Brian, unfortunately, wasn't able to make the interview. And so you won't hear him on the back and forth today, but it's going to be a good content. And I know that our listeners are going to enjoy it. Before we get into that conversation, though, it's time for us to highlight one of those lovely reviewers who's taken the time to highlight us and the show, and generally somebody who's left us a nice 5-star review. Brian, who are we putting in the spotlight today?
Game changer. 5 stars. What? There's like 8 A's and then 7 question marks. I'm blown away and amazed with the creative minds of Brian and Nate for even coming up with the idea to start such a podcast. Actually, it wasn't our idea. Caleb Harnish, baby. What's up? Caleb, our boy out in Charleston. Yeah, it was his idea. For even coming up with the idea to start such a podcast. These two are on their way to becoming legends. This podcast has helped myself reach that tipping point in my career that I always had a feeling I could reach, just didn't know where to start. The real life and real time scenarios Waste No Day guests and hosts lay out are applicable in real life, and I experience them daily. Applying the strategies and techniques I've learned from Waste No Day has helped me reach monthly personal records in sales that I never knew could be reached. From my family to yours, Nate and Brian, thank you so much for all you do. You two are legends in my book, and I am sure many others would agree. It's in the water is the name.
No,
Yeah.
I like that. You were struggling because there were so many exclamation points in that review. It was just like you weren't used to that amount,
Yeah.
I'm a lot to read.
I don't know about you, but I started trying to picture his book when he said "Your legends in my book." I was like, I'm picturing something like along the lines of Lord of the Rings, and I'm Legolas with the bow and arrows, and you're Gimli. You're the dwarf with the axe and the red beard. I mean, Gimli's still a legend, bro. We're competing for kills the entire time.
I could see that. That'd be fun. Either that or like a coloring book, man. I don't know. It's a short book of legends. Not very high bar either.
Appreciate that. It's in the water. I would love to know your name. Give you a shout out on that front. But that review is from January 31st, 2025. See, I don't know if that's when it's written, because it usually takes a couple days for Apple to post it, or if that's when it posted. But either way, someone at the end of January of the year we're recording this episode dropped that one. And we do appreciate it, my man or woman.
True.
Yeah, it's in the water.
Guess we're not sure.
Idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea what it is, but it could go either way.
Well, we appreciate the review and we're very thankful for that. And we know that you're going to be very thankful for this conversation. So we're looking forward to putting Dr. Benjamin Hardy in your passenger seat. Our guest today is Dr. Benjamin Hardy, and we are super honored to have him on the show today. He is, of course, a renowned author and has co-authored many books, including Who Not How, The Gap and the Gain, 10X is Easier Than 2X. And this one he's also co-authored, The Science of Scaling, which is his latest book. And this one is specifically about rapidly growing and expanding your business well beyond just the average organic growth. It's going to be a great conversation. And Dr. Hardy, we are super honored to have him here. Welcome here, sir.
I'm super happy to be here, man. It's my pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much for joining. It's a great honor to have you on the show. And for our listeners, you are certainly making waves in the business leadership world. Our podcast is centered around a lot of technicians and business owners and managers in the home services industry. So we have HVAC techs and plumbers and electricians, and then, their managers and owners and everything else that go along with that. So they may or may not be familiar with you. You have your autobiography listed as an organizational psychologist, which I have a lot of questions about what that title means. But why don't you give us a little bit of history about who you are and what you're about?
I'll be super brief. I mean, what level of history do you want?
Well, why don't you start off with how you got into what you're doing now, which is you're working with, you co-founded scaling.com. You're an author. You have a lot of great pedigree on the resume, the people that you have worked with. But perhaps you could give us a little bit of background about who you are and why you chose the career trajectory, which has obviously evolved over the course of time, but why you chose even where you started from.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous question, man. So I grew up, I'm the oldest of three boys, and my parents had a pretty rough divorce when I was age 11 and just became tough. Honestly, my father became super depressed, became a very extreme drug addict of all levels of drug addict. And, I basically lost all foundation. When you begin to really study trauma, and one of my favorite books on the topic is, obviously The Body Keeps the Score, but also Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes. Yeah.
When you go through a painful traumatic experience, the worst thing that happens to you is what it does to your future. It totally disrupts and destroys any sense of a positive future. And so when you lose one of the things that Viktor Frankl wrote about in Man's Search for Meaning, and he was speaking about people in the concentration camps, is that basically the only way to help someone in that situation is to help them have a goal for their future. Because when you start losing goals, when you start losing that future, the present becomes toxic, the present becomes painful, and then you just start thinking about the past, and honestly, you fade away as a person. So that was where I was when I was in high school. I kind of started to lose sense of that future, and luckily had some really good support people to help me rebuild that future. I ended up serving a 2-year church mission and kind of gave my life to serving others. And it was during those 2 years serving that I really began reading a ton of books, spiritual books, Christian books, philosophy books, psychology books, business books. I was reading a ton of stuff, and I was also writing in my journal. And I honestly filled stacks of journals. And I first learned journaling through just documenting my experiences. And then I learned about journaling through unloading my thoughts and unloading my issues and learning how to heal through journaling. And then I learned how to write from an inspirational standpoint. They call it stream of consciousness writing, if you've heard of that, where you're just honestly just
right.
And I just learned how to learn through journaling and receive even inspiration, I'll say from God, from journaling. And through the process of having transformational experiences, and I did go through huge transformation. I came back a different person. I probably grew mentally and spiritually 20 years during those 2 years. I came back different. Before I went on that mission, I barely graduated high school. I tried to do community college. I dropped out. My brain couldn't think. When I came back, I breezed through college. I graduated with 0 college credits to a bachelor's in less than 3 years, went into a PhD program. My brain was different. I was a different person, and I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know I wanted to write about business at that time. I wanted to write about psychology and human transformation because of everything I'd gone through. And so I knew I wanted to be a writer. I didn't know which direction I was going to go with that. And so I ended up studying theoretical psychology in my undergrad. And then just as I was home, I was reading a bunch of books, and I fell in love with entrepreneurship. And so I wanted to study leadership and organizational change. And so I went and got a PhD in organizational psychology. And during the PhD process, my wife and I became foster parents of 3 kids. We ended up taking that through its course, adopting them after 3 years. And also during my PhD program, I started writing online, and very quickly my blogs began to be read by millions and millions of people. And so by the time I finished my PhD, I had published a few books, 3 or 4 books, and I had started a collaboration with Dan Sullivan, which ended up leading to the 3 books I wrote with him: Who Not How, The Gap and the Gain, and then 10X is Easier Than 2X.
Mm-hmm.
And so those books were, I would consider them fairly entrepreneurial strategy books. And my whole direction went into entrepreneurial strategy. But I just obviously have a deep psychological core that drives my understanding of strategy, which I think differentiates my thought a lot from most people talking about strategy. I have really deep psychological understanding, both theoretical psychology as well as transformational psychology. And so that changes how I look at strategy and even leadership and scaling. And so, yeah, after my time with Dan Sullivan, and our books, have done well, drove thousands of people to his program. I was personally frustrated because I felt like a lot of people who were studying these topics and even teaching these topics still never actually just got to the crux of how do you scale. Well, what is good strategy? These are all still muddled topics in my mind. And so I walked back to the drawing board, and that's where I began writing The Science of Scaling over the last 2 years and ultimately creating scaling.com.
Yeah, that's great context there. And to give you a little bit of perspective on our industry in the home services, I think most home services businesses have been started out of the trenches, meaning that there is somebody who got into it. Typically, it's because their dad or their grandfather or their uncle or whatever was in the trades. And then, they started at a young age and they worked their way up and they got to a place where they either took ownership of the family business or they pivoted out of the business and they started their own and they, ground up from there. And so there's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of sweat equity. There's a lot of challenge with scaling the business because it's so fundamental that our services are hands-on services. And yet the hands-on piece of it is not necessarily what helps the business actually grow. And yet it facilitates the business itself, right? Like you can't have the business without having the hand skills, the hard skills, but everything else that comes with the scaling piece of it isn't necessarily taught in the home services. So I'm interested in having a great conversation with you today. I just finished up your book, The Science of Scaling, this week, and it really expanded my mind. And so I want to kind of start there because there was an inspiration behind why you even decided to write that book, which I also finished up the Who Not How book a week or two ago, which I have questions about that one too. But you've written a lot of books and you've partnered with a lot of amazing people. And yet it seems like perhaps you felt something was left undone, specifically around the concept of scaling. So what was your inspiration for writing that book, and why did you feel like the world needed another book specifically about that topic?
The thing is, I don't know if there ever really was a good book on the topic, to be honest with you. But like I mentioned, my frustration after my partnership with Dan, fell in love with that. I learned so much, loved writing Who Not How, The Gap in the Gain, loved writing 10X is easier than 2X. And I would argue much of the thought of those books was my own. I took a lot of the initial nuggets of insight from Dan, which are life-changing, but I really wanted to go deep on those. That's why I was able to develop those books. But I still felt like, you understand the concept of a bell curve, right? And that most people sit in the middle of the bell curve and there's only a few people on the outliers, right? And I felt like even people who are getting business coaching and business training, or even probably people listening to podcasts like this, probably less than 5% of them actually can take this and scale with it, right? And I was in programs where people are not listening to great content like yours for free. They're paying tens of thousands, 20,000, 50,000 bucks a year. And I just would look at the room and I'd say, most of these people are stagnant. Most of these people are growing like 10, 20% a year. And I get that that's normal in most businesses, but I myself have seen what it feels like to grow 5, 10x, right? In a very short period of time. Like, our company, just for context, almost grew 2x last month, and it'll grow 2x again next month, right? And so, like, again, and it's not a technology business, although it will become that, but I know what it feels like to strip away the nonsense and to grow and to operate from the future rather than to operate from the past. And so I just felt like, and I don't know if I've done it full justice, right? That's just one book, but I just felt like most people they don't know what it really takes. And there's thousands of books on these various topics, and most of it isn't going to get people there. And so I do my best to just cut through the noise and give, to the best of my ability, something that someone can actually use to transform their business. I mean, in my opinion, if someone's not going for 10, 20, 50x, then by virtue, they are not scaling. If someone has a business that's doing $1 million and they're not going for at least 10 or 20 or 30, they can't say that they are scaling. They can say that they're growing. They cannot say they're scaling.
Okay. So first of all, let's define those two terms, right? What, in your opinion, what's the difference between growing and scaling?
I mean, you can grow 1%. right? Growth
Right.
just means you're incrementally moving slightly in a direction, right? Scaling in my mind means that you're actually, I would say that, some people have defined it as at least 60% growth a year. I think there's a McKinsey study that said you have to be growing at least 60% a year. There's also been studies that say if you're not growing by about that much, you're probably not going to ever scale, right?
Hmm.
I don't think that there's ever like a threshold. Like, I don't think you have to get to 100 million to be considered scaling. I don't think you have to get to that level, but I do think you've got to be, getting into the tens, 20, your business has to become substantial. If you get to 5 million, that's not scaling, really. I mean, and so the question is, how do you get to 20, 50 plus million, and how do you do it quickly? Because another part of it, and this kind of hit my insight, was if you're growing very slowly, and I get the value of incremental growth. I get the idea of compounding over time. But when it comes to good strategy, usually if you're growing really slowly, it means you'll never actually end up truly breaking through. Like in business, most businesses that grow really slowly, they don't get very far.
Yeah. Now, it sounds to me like you're scaling, you're defining as kind of like exponential growth, like just not only large growth, but also rapid growth. The
Yeah,
timeline
it
is a
has to
piece
be
of it.
large and rapid. For me, I would say in simple terms, at minimum, probably 5 to 10x within at least 3 years. I mean, at most 3 years. At most 3 years, but I know people who would go 10 to 20 to 50x in 3 years.
Yeah. Which is amazing and causes a whole assortment of challenges that were not in the original part of the equation, I'm sure. Before we get into more of that meat, I want to understand something that you kind of talked about in the book, which is, okay, I'm listening to this podcast. Maybe I'm a small business owner. Maybe I'm a large business owner. Maybe I'm still a technician in a truck right now, and I'm listening to this podcast. And I think most people think that sounds awesome. I would love to do that. But I believe you kind of revealed in the book that not everybody is actually interested in scaling. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. I mean, to scale, like we're talking about here, if a service-based business right here doing 2 million a year, if they want to just, you know, do what they're doing for the next 10, 20 years and maybe get up to 3 to 5 million, they might say 10, but they won't get to 10, by the way. I'll just tell you that. They won't get to 10 even in 20 years if they're thinking that way. If they just want to just keep coasting, that's kind of what I would call a lifestyle business. It might not feel like a lifestyle business because maybe they're still the bottleneck and they're still working 50 hours a week. So it actually isn't a lifestyle business, but it's not a scaling business, right? And so I think a lot of people just have to face the fact that they are comfortable with where they're at. It took a lot of work to get to where they're at. It was painful, maybe even one of the most painful experiences of their life to even start the business and to get to where they're at. And so they can't fathom how to go from 2 to 20 or 50 million because they think it's going to take the same amount of pain to do it. And that's because they don't understand strategy. And so, yeah. And some people just honestly, it also fits with the idea. I'm rereading or I'm listening to the book about Steve Jobs called Becoming Steve Jobs. Have you ever read or listened to that one?
I'm not familiar with that one, no.
So, a lot of people know about the Walter Isaacson one. He wrote Elon Musk. He wrote a really good biography on Jobs, but Becoming Steve Jobs is a really interesting book. It's mostly about like the 12 years that he was exiled. He got kicked out of Apple. He went away. He created Next. He bought Pixar. And that really is what saved him. It was the experiences he had at Pixar. But no, that's just an amazing book.
And within that, I started the question off by asking, like, what is it that some people, they think they want? They think they want growth. They think they want scale, but there's elements of it that they're either not willing to sacrifice. They think the same strategy that they've been doing is going to get them there, and everything that goes into that. And then also, there might be just they haven't fully understood what that even takes. And I think so much of the reason that we don't grow as fast as we should, kind of even in reading your book, is we're not even mentally prepared for that. Like we're not mature enough to handle that. So if we're, conceptually, like in my head, 100 million, 200 million, 20x, 30x, 40x, that all sounds really good. But I'm not sure that I'm mature enough. And I'm not sure that most people are mature enough or like ready for what the impact of what that is. And yet you said your company 2x, just last month. Like, what are the hurdles that hold people back from either the readiness or the opportunity or the maturity? I don't know what the things that you've encountered, but what holds people back from being ready or stepping into those areas of growth?
I love what you're saying. And I couldn't agree more about maturity. It's interesting because psychologically, and I kind of laid out the science of it. People are driven by goals. And so for the business owner who's doing 1 or 2 million, right? I really don't think that they have a goal to do much more than 4 or 5 million. Like that's what they're shooting for, right? Their goal is incremental from where they're at. They really don't have, they may say, and I've encountered this a lot where, I wrote about him in the book, but one of our clients, he's someone who had, they had a law firm doing like 2 million and he said he wanted to get to 100 million, which that in and of itself was rare. I was like, holy cow. Problem for him was it was 10 years away, right? And that basically was going to guarantee he would never get there because when your goal is 10 years away, you're not actually solving the goal now. What he realized was he was actually not solving how do I get to 100 million? He was solving how do I get to 5 because he was at 2. And trying to solve how do I get to 5 is very different from how do I solve getting to 100. And so for him, we had to move his timeline forward. We had to use time as a psychological tool and move it forward and say, no, you're going to go for 100 million in 3 years, not 10 years. And once he did that, he had to really start to think about how do I get to 100 million? He had to start thinking, how do I, like, what does that even mean? What is a business model to 100 million? He'd never even thought about it. What does that even start to look like? He'd never even had a plan to it. And then he started to use that 100 million as the reference frame to looking at his current business and everything he was then doing. And he had just realized almost everything we're doing right now is broken, right? And so I think that the first starting point is actually allowing yourself to set a goal. Like for the people listening, the first point is honestly to actually have a scale goal and to actually just let that sit, but not let it sit to make you sad. Like a lot of people don't understand goals. A lot of people think that if you don't hit the goal, you're a loser. To who? Who says you're a loser if you say, I'm going to shoot for 10 million and you end up at 6? Like who calls you a loser?
Yourself.
No one. And that's a really dumb thing to do, right? That's not helpful. Like why would you call yourself a loser? And so people have really bad emotions and identities around goals. They don't realize that goals are tools. Goals are tools for looking at the present. They're tools for creating direction. And so the first step is honestly to actually allow yourself to have a scale goal, right? If you're doing 1 million, actually start to say, rather than trying to get for 2 or 3 million, why don't you actually say, what would it look like if your business was to be at 30 or like even 10? Even a 10x. Like, what would it take to get to 10 million, right? If you're at 1 million, like, how would that shift your focus? How would that shift your model? What about what you're currently doing has nothing to do with that? You use the goal as a tool to start actually thinking about it. And if you thought about it for long enough, you started to get rid of the stuff that didn't help you, you would find a pathway to 10 million and it wouldn't take any longer than if you were going to go for 2 or 3. So people just don't even start with the right goal. John Doerr, who's the billionaire venture capitalist, he said that a goal properly set is halfway reached. And the reason is that once you set the goal properly, the best thing that it does for you is it weeds out almost all the dead end paths. Almost everything most people are doing right now fits in that 80% of the Pareto principle, where 80% of what you're doing creates almost 0 results. So once you actually set the right goal, it allows you to get rid of all the dead end paths and it actually allows you to start solving the goal. Your brain, they call it pathways thinking in psychology, but your brain will start to figure out how to solve the goal if you actually set the goal and start to think about it and commit to it.
Now, in the book, you refer to this term or phrase, the impossible goal. And I think what you're pushing against is what you sort of alluded to earlier, that, we are setting small goals. And in setting small goals, we're not thinking differently. And also, we are allowing time to be the dictator of how we achieve it rather than using time as a tool. And this was something that really resonated with me. Could you help me understand, well, first of all, explain what Parkinson's law is, and then how using time as a tool can help us accomplish an impossible goal?
Yeah, so Parkinson's law is just simply the idea that work fills the space you give it. So if you give yourself a year to write a book, it'll take you a year. If you give yourself a month, you'll figure out a way to do it in a month, right? And usually what they found is that if you give yourself a much shorter timeline, obviously you can shorten it so short that it becomes absurd. You're not going to write a whole book in an hour. I guess you could do it on ChatGPT. But usually the quality doesn't drop. Because most of people's time, right? Even they've done research studies on this at like Boston Consulting Group and stuff like that. They've done the studies that 10% of company time is spent productively. Most company time is spent on stuff that's trivial. It doesn't move the needle. It's distraction. So like most people have to just face the fact that the majority of what they're doing right now is a waste. You don't need to call it a waste, but it's not effective, right? It's the 80% of stuff that gets almost 0 results. So that's a first level of honesty that most people have to face. And so the idea of using time as a tool is just giving yourself less time, right? Rather than saying, I'll 10x my company in 10 years, actually try to solve it in 2 or 3. Because now if you only give yourself 2 or 3, again, you use it as a tool, not as a stressor, but you use it as like, honestly, a blade to cut away bad thinking. If you only have 2 or 3 years to do it, you can't take the slow paths. You have to actually find the better path. You have to find the right path. You have to find an effective path. And so that's called pathways thinking. That's also that's called strategy, is actually finding a path that you weren't currently looking for, right? Most people, they just take the path that they're on right now and they just keep trying to double down on the current path. That's called linear thinking. Your current path won't get you to 10 or 20x. You have to actually find a new one. And so using time as a tool forces you to find that new one. Because if you have 10 years, you're not going to get on a new path. You're going to stay on your current path. If you have 2 years to 10x your business, now you have to go think of a different business model. Now you have to go find more effective paths. And so that's going to force you to start thinking differently, as you said. It's going to force you to start operating in a much more powerful way. So the first step is actually setting the goal and then using the goal as the filter for the right paths forward, and being willing, importantly, to let go of your current path. Even let go of, in a lot of ways, your current model, your current business. Not always, but big chunks of it, or at least big aspects of how you've defined yourself. That's the old model. That's your current self. That's your past self. That's not the path to the future.
And this is where my mind was both blown, and I wanted to just directly talk to you in the audiobook and say, but wait, that's not going to work.
Say it. What's not going to work? What's not going to work, Nate?
Yeah. And this is what, so you used in the book, you used an example of the space program, and you talked about how, Kennedy gave this big inspirational speech, and then he set the goal. And I can't remember if it was like 8 or 9 years or something like that. We're going to plant the flag on the moon.
He set an arbitrary timeline. He said, we'll get there by the end of the decade. That's called an arbitrary timeline. That's like when people say, I'll get there in 10 years.
Right. Yeah. Just pulling the number out of thin air. And I'm like, okay, so all right, I'm working this backwards. First of all, like the whole time component's blowing my mind, because I'm thinking like, well, that you're right. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Hidden Figures, but it's kind of also about the space race as well. And it's talking about how you have to invent new math, and you have to think about the things differently. And obviously, as the Russians were progressing in their journey to the same goal, like that kept escalating things on the US side. But as I was thinking about it, compressing the timeline for me felt dangerous depending upon what you're talking about. And so you gave the analogy, and I think you said the Gemini program, and there was another one, I can't remember the name of the programs that were predecessors to the Apollo program, which was actually about landing on the moon. But you said they got caught up in like bureaucracy and too many testing and whatever. And I'm thinking, okay, well, hang on a second. There's a component of time that allows for safety. In fact, we were just talking about this in my business the other day. We talked about how comfort and ease are the enemy of safety, because when you get comfortable with something, you stop taking it seriously. Like take electrical, for example. The minute you get comfortable with electrical and you start letting your guard down is the minute that something disastrous can happen, because you don't take the precautions and the necessary safety elements that you should. And so I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, well, if Kennedy forced them to compress the timeline, would there not be a point of diminishing return, the opposite direction, where you actually start shortcutting things? Because natural human reaction when somebody says, well, you got to do this and you got to do this faster, is okay, yes, I have to think differently, but I'm also going to start cutting things out. And if I don't have some guideline or some safety mechanism, what if I cut out the wrong thing? And in the space race, then I start thinking, okay, well, let's just say that they started reducing number of tests and they started reducing safety protocols. And then boom, an astronaut dies, a crew of astronaut dies. Well, doesn't that create a whole new set of problems? Because now the people who are supposed to be flying and doing these test missions are like, hang on a second. I don't want to jump in this thing because it seems like you have escalated this chain of scaling too quickly and it's not safe. I don't trust the product anymore. So that was a lot to kind of verbally dialogue. That was just me kind of thinking through my thoughts in my head. But, you gave the example, like, could we have been on the moon in 1966 or 1965? And I'm thinking, well, how many astronauts have to die if we shortcut the process and try to do it that fast? So help me understand where the elements of using time as a tool cross against the elements of doing it wisely, sustainably, and safely.
100%. Beautiful thoughts. Beautiful thoughts. For your listeners and for the NASA, and by the way, I interviewed a NASA engineer for this. back to the idea that 10% of time is spent on actually the thing. In psychology, in strategy, we'd call it the crux, right?
Right.
I brought up just examples that probably even with the space program, and I gave a few examples, right? Certainly the bureaucracy, that's huge, right? But there were loads of things that they did that didn't help them get to the moon. Because all I'm talking about is cutting those things out. I'm not telling you that you shouldn't make sure that your product isn't amazing. In fact, part of using time as a tool is to force you on the right thing and get all the reps you need on the right thing rather than spending 90% of your time on the wrong things, right? And so as it relates to either you or your people's companies, I would still argue that most of your people who are listening, and they can disagree with me, they're not as good at what they do as if you're talking about quality of product, I guarantee you they're not as good as what they think they are. And their product isn't as focused as they think it is. And I'm guessing that they serve probably more broader audience than they could. And they could get more specific, more differentiated, and more masterful, and maybe even more innovative. Steve Jobs said that innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. And so to quality of product, if you're not scaling, that means your product's probably not that amazing, to be honest with you. And it's not that differentiated and it's not that focused. And you're probably, I see with most businesses, they're serving way too broad of an audience. They've got way too many competing products. They're way too diluted in their focus. They're not masterful at what they do. And so I'm actually just saying, cut out all the fluff and actually get defined and say, this is who we are. This is what we do. And let's become the best in the world at it. To the idea of good to great. Most companies and probably most people listening to this are not doing that. They're probably doing 5 things at a mediocre level or at an okay level, not one thing at the best in the world level. That's what I'm inviting you to do, is actually let the goal shape what am I going to become the best in the world at and differentiate yourself.
Right. And this was personally challenged to me. It will come as no surprise to our listeners that I have more of an engineering perspective. If you're familiar with DISC, I would fall somewhere on the CS or SC side of the equation.
I love that. And honestly, I'm actually studying engineering because I love engineering.
And so with that, it's not my degree, but it's my perspective. I am more systems oriented. I am more process driven. I am more strategy thoughtful.
But systems and strategy are not the same thing. A lot of people can be really good at building systems that have no strategy.
Fair point. From that angle, though, what I found myself realizing is that I am probably bottlenecking our scale because of that perspective, or at least that's certainly a consideration that I need to take. And I was thinking I should probably fire myself because I might be getting in the way of growth and really exponential growth because I'm cautionary. I want to make sure things have redundancies. I want to make sure that there is steps and that we've thought through on details and that we are executing on the things that we need to be doing. And it made me as I was thinking through that, whether it was the space program or whatever else, it made me think okay, well, I can think differently, but if I am, or the listeners that are listening to this podcast, if we are more detail oriented by nature, if we are more systematic, if we are slower, if we are more cautionary, if we are more thinking about the reasons it won't work.
By the way, all those things are really smart.
Thank you. If we're thinking about the reasons it won't work, well, is there hope for us? But what does that hope look like? Can I change myself and my perspective? Yes, I know that's a possibility. Do I need to invite somebody into my life who is more grandiose and big picture in thinking? How can some people who are more on my side of the equation of perspective and personality scale?
It's a beautiful question. There's so much strength in what you're saying. There's so much strength. There's quite a bit of strength in redundancy, to be honest with you. In the literature in management, they'd actually call that slack. Having some slack, right? Like having some extra money, right? Or having some extra staff, right? Or, I actually want to write a book on Slack called How to Build Systems with Enough Slack to Scale, right? And so having some redundancy and having some slack is actually really smart. So number one, all human systems, if we're talking about engineering and human systems, all human systems are driven by goals. And all systems are optimized for doing something. The problem with most systems is that they're optimized for doing too many things. Therefore, they're optimized for none. They're trying to do too many things. And that's a business that's trying to do too many things. And so part of what, even Steve Jobs said, you have to make your system simple, right? And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work, whether it's writing code, coming up with concepts, building a business. It takes a lot of work to take something that's inherently complex and innovate it so that it's simple and usable. That's hard work. And so building a complex system, it doesn't take a genius to do that. It takes a genius to take something that's very complex and actually turn it into something simple. That's a lot harder. And so the main thing that I'm trying to invite people to do here, and even someone like you, is to have you, Nate, have a goal that's so big that it forces you to relook at your system and think, okay, you're a genius builder of systems and machines and structures and processes. But if we were operating from a 10x or a 50x goal, how much of your current processes no longer work?
No, basically all of them. Yeah.
Yeah. And so now that you have your engineering mind, which is actually really valuable, if we were to operate from a 10 or 20x, right? How could you systemize that? Right? You still need to systemize, right? You still need operations. You can't scale without systems. You can't scale without operations. The thing is, though, is they have to be optimized. And they can't be optimized for 50 things. They have to actually be optimized for one. They have to be simpler systems that are focused. And the hard part. And so I want your redundancy. I want your slack. I just want you to build a system that can get to that goal. And it's not going to be the same system that's running right now that you're so proud of.
And that's the part that really gets at a lot of people, myself included, is we fall in love with the way that things are. Maybe we even take pride with the amount of growth that has been accomplished or the successes that have been obtained.
Nothing wrong with that, by the way.
Unless you are unwilling to sacrifice those for the sake of changing them for the better, right? Can we become too in love with the way things are that we are not willing to give it up so that it could be better?
Yes. Yes. And you can get in love with your own thinking, and you can get in love with what you've built. That's called sunk cost bias and endowment effect. Endowment effect means you overvalue something because you did it. And yeah, if you want to operate from a bigger future than what you have now, including your role, including your mastery, is not sufficient. And if you're willing to get to that next level, the goal will show you where to go. It'll show you who to be. And it does take an identity change. I call it in the book, raising the floor. Raising the floor means letting go of your former way of doing things. It means letting go of saying yes to the things you used to say yes to, including who you said yes to and how you did it. And so it does take an identity shift and even a role shift. I'm going through that right now, by the way. In my old businesses, I was always the centerpiece. But because we're scaling and we're building something substantial, my role becomes more specific. My role becomes less central. And my opinion becomes less important, to be honest with you. It's still important, but it's just one out of many great opinions. And so then you have to find a new role in a bigger game. And a lot of people don't want to do that. That's part of what I think makes people not want to scale is that they would prefer to be the king of a small castle than to be a partner on a 10 or 100x bigger castle or a bigger movement.
Yeah, that's very profound. And as I'm thinking through setting that impossible goal, my mind goes straight to like reverse engineering it, right? So
Which is beautiful.
If we're going to go to 100 million, here's what we would have to do. But help me understand, like when we set those impossible goals, we want to have operations in 20 different states. We want to have 500 technicians on the road.
But that's not the goal. That's a model. That's a potential model that you're going into, right? You might not need the 20. I mean, you could. That might be a possible path, but that might not be what you need to do.
Meaning that I'm trying to solve the how before I know what I'm trying to solve.
Yeah. Don't get so obsessed on one model or one path. Let's just say your goal is 100 million.
Right.
That might mean you're in 20, right? That could be the path. You might also be able to get to 100 million with five states, right? And so the question then becomes, are you optimizing for 20 states or for the 100 million? And those might be two competing goals.
Right. In the setting of that goal, and we work it backwards, if we are to establish systems or processes that are going to get us to 100x, right? Along the way, will there not be an evolution or some type of staging? Because we can't just jump straight to the system that would carry us to 100x. Like there has to be an evolution or some type of phasing to get into that. How does that factor into how we strategize about accomplishing that scale goal? Because we can go to the end and we could say, okay, this is what 100x looks like, and here's what we would need to do that and everything else. But isn't there, like, if we keep backing up from that, before we get to 100x, we have to get to 50x. And before we get to 50x, we get to 2x.
Yeah. But it depends on the direction you're going, right? It depends on the direction you're going. Starting from whatever the goal is at least you can start heading in that direction, right? Well, even though, yes, the system will adapt, you don't have the perfect plan, even your plan to whatever the goal is not right, right? It's going to change. The system will change along the way. But if you're at least heading in that direction, you will be building a different system than if you were heading towards 2 million. Like, at least now you're trying to figure out that system towards the higher goal. And yes, you have to expect that it will change all along the way. Let me give a few different examples. So again, in psychology, they call it deliberate practice. Deliberate practice means you're practicing toward a goal, right? And so in 10x is easier than 2x. I gave my son as an example. My son is a tennis player in high school. If his goal is to play college tennis, there's a lot of pathways to get him to that goal, right? If he moves the goal up to going to pro, the viable pathways decreases. Again, here in Orlando where I live, there's hundreds of good coaches that could possibly get him to tennis, or could get him to college. But if he actually went for pro, most of those colleges would be bad options. Most of those coaches would not be able to get him to pro. And so we'd have to filter those pathways out, and we'd have to filter and find a different path. And to the point of his deliberate practice, if he was actually going for that goal in reverse engineering, how do I go pro? He would learn tennis differently than if he was going for college, because there's a lot of acceptable components of college tennis that are not acceptable to pro. And if he was using that higher goal as his path, he would learn tennis differently. He'd have different coaches. He'd optimize different things. There's different things, it's not always like the linear, first you have to learn this, then this, then this. Another example I give is Mr. Beast, right? Mr. Beast, I get that he's an extreme outlier, of course, but he was practicing or making videos on YouTube from the goal of becoming the biggest YouTuber in the world. He was not making YouTube videos from the perspective of, I'd like to just make 50 videos. And so his practice or his learning was going towards a very different goal. And that's what shaped his development. Just one other example for myself. When I was a PhD student, I had a very high and specific goal that shaped how I became an author. I didn't just say I want to write a book. I said, how do I get a 6-figure book deal? In order to get a 6-figure book deal, I had to become a specific type of writer. Writing a book and getting a 6-figure book deal are not the same things, and the developmental paths to those things are very different. And so back to your question, or even just going to my guy who I already gave the example, when he moved his goal, first off, to 100 million, that changed how he thought about his company. Because, a law firm getting to 100 million, that's different than a law firm getting to 5 million, right? But then moving the timeline forward, he now had to say, okay, if I'm going to get my law firm from 2 to 100 million in 3 years, what are the potential pathways to even doing that? Do I have 20 offices? What forms of law do we practice? Like, what forms of law are even viable, right? We can't do 50 different forms of law. Most of them are not profitable. Maybe we have to optimize for 2 or 3, and then there's just a lot of things he had to start thinking about and solving because he was thinking about 100 million, right? None of those systems are perfect, but at least now he's getting on that path. He might be able to build great systems to get him to 10. And then you're right, a lot of them break and bust, and he's got to figure out other problems. But at least now he's solving towards 100 million.
Right. And there's going to be error along that way. Because,
enormous error.
We're human. We can only see so far. And really, like, part of the concept that you're talking about with the impossible goal and having to invent new ideas, and you gave multiple examples in the book, is that you probably haven't even thought about the solution that will actually make it work. Like, it's probably not even
I guarantee they haven't.
Sometimes it is. Like, sometimes it is, and you're staring in the face and you just realize you got to cut out everything else that's holding you back. But a lot of the times it's something that you get forced into thinking how I'm going to do this. And it's completely different than how you're thinking now. And in the book, you use the 3 F's. You talk about the frame, the floor, and the focus. And you mentioned it just a little bit ago about raising your floor. Help us understand, number one, what does that mean? And then how does it practically look in terms of business?
Yeah. So frame, floor, and focus is just a framework. We call this scaling framework, but frame is just fundamentally about what you see and what you do in the present. We all have a frame, and the frame determines how we filter information. No two people have the same frame. Even you're hearing different things than I think I'm communicating because you're filtering my information through your frame, right? Which comes through experience. It comes through many things. It comes through biases, right? But the fundamental piece of our frame is actually our goals. Our goals determine, what we see and what we don't see. They determine what's signal and what's noise. And signal are things that are relevant to what we're looking for, and noise are things that are irrelevant. And we already know our brain honestly filters out 99.999% of information, and it just focuses on a very few things. And so the frame just is what you see, and it's based on your goals. And so everything we've been talking about is that when you raise the frame or when you raise the goal, a lot of the things that used to be relevant become irrelevant. Thinking about in your business, a lot of the things, if you're doing business at 1 million, become irrelevant if you're going for 20 or 30. Even a lot of the clients, maybe even your current team, maybe even how you think about your business in general, a lot of it falls below the floor. And so the floor is really just the line that divides what you say yes to and what you say no to. And when you start going for higher goals, the floor goes up, meaning that the viable options decreases. So I gave my son Caleb as the example of tennis. If he went for college or if he went for pro, the floor would have to go up on who his coach is. He can't have the same coach as if he was going for college. The floor would go up. He'd have to say no to most of those coaches. The same is true in business. If you're going for scale, your floor has to go up, and you probably can't say yes to all of the opportunities, all the work you're now doing, even all the activities. Most of that stuff goes below the floor, and most of it becomes nonsense, and it becomes stuff you got to start letting go of. And then the focus just becomes figuring out the path, as you just were mentioning. Not a perfect path, it's a flexible path, but figuring out how to actually solve the goal, actually focusing and figuring it out and building it and building a team to build it.
And that kind of turns us, you're talking about some pathways, and in your previous book that you wrote with Dan, Who Not How, in the current book, The Science of Scaling, you talk about super who's. And I want to focus on that concept for a little bit, because part of the discrepancy that I'm trying to rectify in my mind is, all right, if we're looking for super who's, which would be, A-class players, people who have been there, who've done it, who are going to carry us there. If I come to them, let's just say I'm $1 million operator or $10 million operator or whatever I am.
Either way.
Maybe I'm just a technician in a truck, and I have this impossible goal that I want to start my own business, and I want to be $100 million, and I don't even have a business right now. What super who is going to entertain my ridiculous goal and is going to say, yeah, I'll partner with you at this low level, and I'll help take you to this grandiose place? First of all, I might not even be able to get in the room with that person, much less afford what they would charge. I might not even know what room I'm supposed to be in or where these people exist. If I'm looking for a super who, does it have to be me first, or how do we close the gap on people who can help us get there?
What do you mean, does it have to be you first?
Do I have to be such a visionary that I can story tell my way into, convincing a $500 million CEO to come work for me, even though I don't have a business, right? Like somebody who's been there and done that and can take us and scale quickly and all these types of things. Or do I have to be lucky enough to find a diamond in the rough? Or do I have to be that diamond in the rough that, like, all of a sudden, you went from like having a terrible past, you graduated college, and then you like books and expansion and boom, 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 boom. That doesn't seem to happen every day.
Number one, yes, you need to be the diamond in the rough. Everyone who's listening needs to be the diamond in the rough if they want to scale. But your questions about how to attract super who's is gorgeous. And your goal really will attract the right people, right? I'm not saying you can, if you're at 1 million, you can get the 500 million CEO. But maybe actually, if you do think from your goal, right? And if you actually clarify and you do some homework, right? You can't just go to a super who and have no homework. If you've done your homework and said, you know what? I'm in this industry. I'm at $1 million. I think we can get to 100 million. And here's why. Here's how most people do things. Here's how I think we can do it. And here's why it's different. And here's why I think it can work. It's not a perfect plan, but I think that there's something here. And if you've actually done your homework and you go talk to them and say, I think we could scale. Number one, your goal is going to attract people. And your goal should always be the filter for who you work with. You shouldn't just work with people because they're decent. What if they are unaligned with you on your goal or on your culture or on work? So the goal should be the first attractor. And then, honestly, your unique approach. And them being able to see in your goal a role for them where they can say, I can help you do that. But what's in it for me, right? They would ask that question. Do I get some form of equity? Not only do they want to be a part of it, right, and help it get done because they can help it get done, but is the upside worth it to them? And usually, to get a little bit of equity or to a great salary, right, there's a lot of ways you can get who's, but your goal needs to merit them. You have to have some credibility. You don't have to be Steve Jobs or anything like that, but you got to have some credibility. You have to have some thought, and the opportunity needs to be compelling to them. It needs to align with what excites them. It may seem hard, but I remember when I was just a graduate student, I wanted to write really good books. It was easy for me to partner with Dan. Number one, I didn't get paid. I got paid to write the books from the publisher, and I made good money doing it. But I saw in him someone I wanted to work with, right? And so I said, I would like to write these books with you and partner with you. And I think it'll blow up your business. And it was a no-brainer for him. And it did do very well for him. And it was transformational for me. And how does Blake Erickson, who's the co-author of this book, right? Blake Erickson is a co-author on The Science of Scaling, and he's also the co-founder of scaling.com with me. He's 27 years old. He doesn't have a lot of credibility compared to me. So how did he convince me to partner with him? Yeah, he had to pay to play. I required him to pay a little bit, but he created a compelling offer and a compelling concept about how to take my ideas to a certain place that I personally didn't want to take them in terms of building scaling.com. And he's like, I'll help you do this. You just keep writing books as you're doing, but we'll build this big company on the back end and we'll create, this number one. And he's like, and I'll do all that stuff. And I'm like, honestly, I had to think about it for a while because I was reaching out to people like Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins wanted to write books with me, right? And I said no to Tony Robbins, and I said yes to this 27-year-old kid who has no credibility. Why would I do that? Because he created a much better future for me. And it was aligned, and I saw a role in it, and he's building it now. He's doing incredible things. And so don't limit what you can do with a vision and with knowing how to talk to people and knowing how to help people find a really good role in it and have a really good win from it. Just because not everyone wants the same thing. What's sticking out in your mind, Nate, and where you push back? I actually like that. I love the challenging mind you have. I actually really like this conversation a lot. I like this better than most podcasts because I like that we're actually challenging each other and talking. It's fun.
I appreciate
rather
that.
than you just catering to whatever thoughts I give.
Thank you. And thank you for being open to the dialogue.
I love it, man.
I want to go back to one of your previous books, Who Not How. And as I was reading, listening to that, I was personally conflicted, maybe even angry to a degree, because
maybe you shouldn't read my books, man.
Yeah, maybe. I was doing a lot of running and listening, so it's okay. It's a good outlet.
Anyways, but what was frustrating you?
Well, I started my journey in my business, in the business that I work, as somebody else's who.
Nothing wrong with that.
I was their who, not for whatever they were trying to do. And, 15 years later, as I'm still in the same company and now I've moved up into upper management and those types of things. And it's been a really good journey and everything. What I was challenged with in your book and I was trying to rectify in my mind is, how do we make the shift from being somebody else's who to now needing somebody else to be our who? Right? Because it's a mental shift of I'm facilitating, I got brought in to be the how. I was the who, but I executed on the how. I came up with the how. I did these things. I executed on these plans and created these ideas and whatever. And I'm not beating my chest or anything. That tons of people do this, right? You get hired by a company and they bring you in for a reason, and you are their who.
Yeah, that's most people.
But I don't want to always be somebody else's who. At some point, I would like to have who's for me. I want to expand. And in the concept of scaling, that's the only way that could possibly happen is I move from being somebody else's who to now needing somebody else to be who for me. And how do we make that mental shift? Especially because right now you're probably talking to a lot of employees. You're probably talking to a lot of people who are the who for somebody else. And if they ever
a lot of them
dreams,
might not want to be the leader.
And maybe they don't. But if they do, how do you make the mental shift? And what hurdles do we even have to get over? What floors do we have to raise to get there?
Your questions are so thoughtful, man. I love them. I absolutely love them. Number one, you will always be someone else's who. So don't diminish that role. It might be in a different format though, right? I'm my wife's who, right? I'm her husband, right? I'm my parent, I'm my kids who, I'm their dad, right? So we'll always be in a relationship, right? And so even when you have partners, right, like you'll have a role and your role is important. And so you will always be a who in the equation, but your point is important, which is how do you get to the point where you actually have other who's that are supporting you? You're not just supporting other people, right? Like there's a really good essay from Paul Graham. He wrote about how money and wealth are two different things. The essay is called How to Build Wealth. And it's all about how wealth is based on value, right? And value is sometimes quantifiable into money, but value is an infinite pie. Money is a finite pie, right? I know that they keep cranking out more of it and stuff like that. There's different forms of it, right? But wealth, and the example he gave is say that someone has a broken down truck, right? Now, that truck has an amount of value, right? It's just sitting there, but he could also restore it, right? And now the truck has more value and it didn't take away from anyone else by doing that, right? And so that is we build value. And so how you get to the point where you're a who that needs support in even simple terms is you become more valuable. Like where, and a lot of it honestly is deep, even just in simple terms, like the most basic start point is actually 80-20, knowing that 80% of what you now do doesn't have that much value.
Ouch.
And so honestly, I'm talking even to myself. Don't take it personally. It's true for me too. It's true for me too. So you have two choices with that 80% so that you can focus on the higher value activities that really matter. You can either delete them or you can delegate them. But even by delegating them, even hiring 20-hour per week assistant to handle some of that more administrative or email or just nonsense, a lot of it can get deleted and you won't lose almost anything. But some of it, you pass that stuff off to someone else so that you can focus on the things that actually matter that have 10x the value. Now your time just became worth 5 to 10x as much. Of course, you can justify that first assistant. Then you keep doing it more and more. You might need a second or a third, or you might need a marketer to help you, right? And so it's becoming so valuable that you need support and that you need start to need some system and infrastructure around you because other things need to get done. I mean, that's really the basics of it. And anyone who's listening to this, even if they're an employee, which as you said, many of them are. By the way, I'm an employee as well. But there is a lot that your current role encompasses that isn't the highest impact in that role. I know that as an employee, you might not feel like you can simplify your role or that you have much autonomy over your role and that you can strip those things out or get an assistant to help you. But the more and more ownership and autonomy you take over where you place your time and energy and putting it on the fewer things that have the bigger upside and getting really good at those things, and either delegating or deleting the other components, that's becoming more valuable. And you'd be shocked. There's some people, because of how valuable they've gotten at what they do, I think Musk said that 1 minute of his time is worth $1 million when he's in meetings. Because what he says has massive impact, right? For good or for bad. And so he doesn't have time, even though he sleeps on the floor, but he doesn't have time to manage all the garbage cans and manage this and that. Like he needs structure around him, right? And that's what a company is structure around a product. So I don't know, what are you taking from all this?
You said earlier, like you can either delete or you can delegate, which, I've also finished up recently, Buy Back Your Time, which was a fantastic read. I believe that
was his better than mine? Give me the truth.
They were both excellent. They were both along this, around the same concepts of like focus on things that matter and like eliminate things that don't. And so, thinking through that concept and thinking through the who, not how, and thinking through delegating or deleting, how do I know if I'm mature enough to actually identify which is which? Like, how do I know if I'm mature enough, if I have enough perspective? Because admittedly, my perspective is limited, as all of ours are to some degree. How do I know if I'm making the right choice with what to delegate or what to delete? How do I know if I'm making the right choice in terms of what I should actually be focused on? Like the thing that I most should be going after is obviously there's wisdom and sound counsel. But how did you make the choices personally of to what you would delegate or what you would delete?
It's all contextual. The first context is, what is your goal? Right? So like your goal should determine where you focus, right? Because if your goal is not to scale the company, right? Or to build a company, then you don't need to go focus over there. You can stay in your role, right? And so the goal determines where you focus and what you delegate and delete, right? Rather than operating from the present, you want to let the future shape the present, right? You want the future to dictate where you focus and what your role becomes and what matters, right? And so if your goal is to get to a certain place, that's going to force you to focus in certain areas and to admit that some things you can't do. Maybe even delete, I'm just going to say it, this podcast, right? Like, or maybe you delete other things. Like, I don't know, because your goal is what would determine where you focus. And maybe this podcast or maybe the listener's job stays relevant, or maybe that becomes something that has to eventually be deleted and therefore goes below the floor. And other things maybe can be delegated, but the goal has to determine where you focus. And from there, you can determine, is this signal for the goal or is this noise? And where's the most important place where I should focus and where do I need more help?
So it sounds like to me, you're saying that it will become evident with the refinement of my impossible goal.
The goal is the filter.
Right.
That's how psychology works. The goal shapes the frame, and the goal should shape the focus. And when you have the higher goal, which is why I wrote about impossible goals, its purpose isn't to decrease quality, which I want there to be quality, but it's a different quality. Rather than maybe being the best podcast in the world, maybe you're doing something else, right? I'm not saying you shouldn't be that. I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah.
And so maybe your goal is to 10x this podcast, and so, and that might be what excites you. But yeah, it's a different type of quality, and it will take a different you. It'll take you specializing in a different way and having different levels of team and support and systemization to accomplish it. And maybe you don't need to lead it though. I think that some people, I'll be honest with you, I would not be a good CEO. And so like I'm a really good strategist. I'm very good with teaching. I can lead in very different ways. Our company's really only been open for like 4 or 5 months and we have 30 employees. And so like I do a lot of training. But like I'm not leading every element of the ship. And I think it's good to know aspects of yourself where it's like maybe you should have an operator who's running a lot of the nuts and bolts, right? The more specific your role can get, and you're in a sweet spot where you really can master and maximize, that's the best. And so you don't have to think, I have to be the leader. In fact, I think that most entrepreneurs, even the ones say who are listening to this, who are at 1 million or 3 million, they probably shouldn't be the leader of the company. They might be the visionary, they might be the direction setter, but there might be someone else who's actually running the ship. And it would be better off if that was true.
As I was listening to your book, and there was many really fascinating examples, real world stories that you gave of people that, through the course of conversation or challenge broke down what they thought was a big goal and turned it into this impossible goal. And then you often gave like, and this is what happened, and this is how the story ended. And a lot of times it was happy ending. I have to believe that for every one of those happy outcomes where somebody set an impossible goal, thought differently, invented new math, and then, charged ahead and scaled exponentially, there's other, maybe even more examples of when somebody set a goal and failed miserably or didn't come up with a new pathway and went down a wrong road or got distracted. Is there such a thing as premature scaling? Like maybe I wasn't ready personally, or maybe the strategy was unsound. Is there a premature scaling that we need to be cautious of and maybe even avoid it?
It's a really good question. Probably. Yeah. I would say that there's two sides of this equation. One is as someone who is super gung-ho and wants to go take on the whole world, but isn't sound, right? And so then they break themselves, right? The other one is the super well-ready person who constantly doubts themselves and doesn't try. And I would say I don't know which one I would say there's more of. I would say certainly there's more people who don't try to scale than even try to scale, right? I think even trying to scale is rare. So
right.
I think I would argue actually that the gung-ho person who shoots for the moon and either blows up or hits the stars is way rarer than the 90+% of very capable people who never try. Would you agree with me on that one or no? Would you say that there's more people who are quite capable but don't ever try to scale? Are there more people who have the potential to scale but don't even try versus the people who don't have the potential but do try?
Yeah, for sure. One of man's biggest detriments is a lack of belief or people to believe in you. And for so many reasons, whether it's your past, your upbringing, pre-recordings in your head that hold you back, we don't dream big enough.
Yes. So, your question is really important. And I would say that in order to scale, there are very hard lessons to learn. One of my favorite books is Too Soon Old, Too Late Smart. And a lot of people don't learn those lessons fast enough. You have to learn lessons quickly if you're scaling. One of the lessons is you have to actually have a good team. A lot of people who we work with, they have had the same employees for 10, 20 years. Great people that they're loyal to who absolutely, if they're honest, are B at best. And they will never fire that person, and they will not make those scale moves, right? And so there's uncomfortable moves you have to make. That's the maturity I think you're talking about. There's uncomfortable moves you have to make and lessons you have to learn. And if someone is willing to make those uncomfortable moves and learn those lessons, they can scale. And a big part of the lesson is that they can't be the only one doing everything. They actually have to get really good people in place and let them go. Who, not how, right? And these things can be learned. Scaling can be learned. It takes largely letting go of that you have to control it all and letting go that your current thinking is the right way. If you can be humble enough to learn, and if you're willing to put really good people in place and have them be aligned on the goal and incentivized toward it, you can do it. You absolutely can do it. But I don't know if everyone should. That's for sure. If someone runs a business, though, what I'm saying to you is if you're already doing $1 million, right, it will only benefit you to go for 10 or 20 rather than go for 2 or 3. It will only benefit you. Because if you actually start thinking about it, 10 or 20, and looking at your current $1 million business from that view, you will have to conclude that the majority of what you're now doing isn't that powerful. Your team isn't right there. And you'd have to start thinking, what's a better model and what's a better path? And if you were willing to explore that, you could find one. And it wouldn't take you more time. It would just take a new level of focus and a new level of mastery and a better team. And you could go do it. Honestly, I'm just telling you, like going from 1 million to 2 million isn't necessarily easier than going from 1 million to 10 million. I'm telling you that. I've seen it so many times. Like, as someone who wasn't necessarily a natural entrepreneur, like I came from a very middle class family. I grew up in trauma, could not even get through high school barely. Like, I'm telling you, I'm more of an academic, but we're creating a company that it will be at over 100 million revenue in its first 3 years. And it's not because I'm the guy who's the best at this. It's because it's doable. Honestly, it's very doable. It's very doable.
I love that challenge, Dr. Hardy. And this has been an insightful conversation. And as we wrap things up, something that's, you kept mentioning in the book, which I want to give you an opportunity to talk about a little bit, is you have an assessment or a test, kind of like a walkthrough as to whether I am ready to scale or not. I know it's part of the book. I don't know if that's available on any of your websites or anything like that. Maybe you could mention that, but I also wanted to give you the opportunity to share about like what you're doing with scaling.com. And if people are interested in what they're hearing today, how they can get more in touch with your books, you, and the things that you got going on.
Yeah. So scaling.com is different. In order to be accepted into scaling.com, you have to actually commit to a 10x goal as a minimum in 3 years or less. And if you read The Science of Scaling, you'll know why. It's a rigorous program for people who are committed to scale. And you get a one-on-one trained strategist. There's group calls. We track your progress. We do anything and everything we can to help you. Obviously, we're not in your company. We're not in your business. This isn't consulting. We're not responsible for your results. But if you're ready to scale and if you're committed to scale, we will help you and we'll be rigorous with you and we'll support you in that. Scaling.com is $2,000 per month. It's a subscription, right? And so you can learn about it at scaling.com. If you go to scaling.com/audiobook, you can get the free audiobook of The Science of Scaling. You can go just listen to it for free. And in terms of the readiness to scale survey, it's more of are you someone who's ready for scaling.com? And so you can apply to the program if that's of interest to you. So scaling.com/audiobook is the free audiobook. There's also, I want to share, we release what are called scaling stories very regularly. And I want to just tell people where that link is, because it's a free link as well, where people can actually just access case studies and stories. Let me just grab that real quick.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Man, if to the listeners while he's getting that information, if you haven't had the opportunity to listen to this book, the fact that it is free, man, just go get this thing. Stop what you're doing right now. Pull the van over, put the pencil down, stop typing that email that doesn't really matter anyways, and go listen to this book. It will change the way that you think.
So the other link is scaling.com/scaling stories. So it's a free link, and there's some case studies. We add some every week. So there's not a ton in there right now, just because we just started and we're doing interviews right now with our members. But there are case studies in the book, and we have another audiobook coming out in September called Time as a Tool. Some great case studies in there, but scaling stories. So it's scaling.com/scaling stories. You'll be able to see some case studies there, and we're adding more to that every week.
Love it. Love it. Dr. Hardy, this has been not only a pleasure, but an honor to spend some time with you. I appreciate the just hopefully organic conversation and the simplicity of, just me pinging questions off of you as part of the interview today. And I appreciate that you've been willing to go through that exercise, not only for myself, but for our listeners as well.
Dude, your questions are really cool. I'm grateful for these questions because they force me to think about it from a different direction. They force me to hear it from the genuine view of someone who's hearing this and doesn't believe in themselves and doesn't think it's possible or doesn't know how to do it. Sometimes when you start doing it so much and you train people to do it and you see people doing it, I won't say overconfident, I get maybe non-empathetic to that viewpoint that you provided. Mm-hmm. And so I really appreciate just the ground level of how do I even start a business, let alone scale one, right? I think that's, it's a really humbling spot. And I can say for myself, I remember thinking some of those thoughts in a prior version of myself as well. When I was just even a grad student, even just starting as a writer. I remember I delayed writing for so long. I came home from that mission and wanted to be a writer, and I didn't write for years because I didn't know how to start and I didn't know what to do. And so, I did tell you the story. I set the goal of having a 6-figure book deal, and I did go do that very quickly. But I had years where I just sat there waiting and not doing anything and just not solving the goal, to be honest with you.
Well, the trades is full of some of the finest people in America, and we need more of them to set impossible goals, start their own business, and serve more people in this country. It would be a good thing. And I hope that you as a listener have been challenged by the podcast today, and that everything that Dr. Hardy has spoken about and we've dialogued about has resonated with you. Make sure that you check him out, not only on the social media platforms, but also at scaling.com and the links that he provided, and listen to the Science of Scaling book. It will change your mind, as well as many of the other previous works that he has collaborated with and worked on. But this has been a great conversation. I know that our listeners have appreciated it, and I'm sure that they will use this as motivation for our weekly challenge, which continues to be the same: to choose to wake up each and every morning and waste no day.